Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for coming today, especially at such short notice. And as you know, the state's revenue shortfall has put the school systems in Oklahoma, including Oklahoma City, into a catastrophic crisis revenue situation. So our first step is in a series of steps as we address our budget shortfall is to recognize that we've got to make some adjustments in our staffing levels so that our building principals can build their master schedules for next year. So this is the first step in a series that we'll be taking to get to the $30 million target that we've established at this point. So with that, we are reducing 208 positions, teaching positions in the district, and we're using a formula that was established back in the last budget crisis that was developed in Oklahoma City. So we're adhering to that formula to get us to those staffing levels. This will save us $8 million at this point in time. One of the things I want to emphasize is that even though the state really hasn't adhered to the state mandated class sizes, we will still not exceed those mandated class sizes, and we will also operate within the collective bargaining agreement that we are currently operating under. In addition, we're anticipating another $22 million in cuts, and those will be coming out in a series of announcements in the next several weeks. And no part of the organization will go untouched, and that includes reductions that will be held here in central office. So with that, I open it up for questions.
Can you talk about this formula? How does this formula work, and how does that help you decide which people to cut?
Well, it really doesn't, we don't decide which people at this point. What it is positions based on the levels that were established back the last time to get to a staffing level that the district could operate under and still offer what we thought was, and again, I wasn't here at that time, but we now believe to be still offering a quality education for our students. So that's the formula that we're following. The nuances of it are pretty complicated, and that there's different numbers all over the district depending on grade level, depending on course offering, et cetera.
What positions are you talking about?
We don't know that yet. So what happens is that when you establish the full-time equivalent, we call that FTE allocation for a building, then the building principal has to go in, look at his or her master's schedule, and then decide what course offerings are going to make. At the secondary level and then at the elementary level, how many sections they're going to be able to offer in their school.
So it's the principals that are going to be deciding this and bringing this to you?
Yeah. Well, it's their building to run, so they make those decisions at the site as to which positions they're going to need to fill to be able to offer the courses to the students. So again, this is, and I'll speak as a former high school principal. You want that autonomy in your building, and then especially at the high school level, you try and make sure that you're offering the classes to the kids that they A, are required to take, and B, that they've elected to take.
Is it true that poor performing schools will lose more teachers than
No.
better performing schools?
No.
How will you decide, how will you allocate or divvy up how many positions are coming in each school?
Well, basically, like I said, we're adhering to that formula that was established, I'm guessing right around 2010. And so it isn't done in a way, first of all, I'm not going to cut across the district a certain percent. So the reason that we had to come out with teachers first is because we have to build these master schedules. We're in a time crunch to do so. We're actually late in the game. But the formulas were simply developed to try and do it in an equitable way across the district.
Is this a reflection on the, I guess, in a cynical way, the reflection on the politicians' state of mind when it comes to education in Oklahoma, that they really just kind of like, it's an afterthought sometimes?
Well, I'm going to try not to speak on behalf of the legislature in that respect, but I will say this. I really believe that the legislature needs to make this budget issue their number one priority, if not their only priority, in this legislative session. Being new to Oklahoma, I understand that this is pretty much a cyclical situation that we face every so many years. I keep hearing that it's going to get better, we'll recover, But then I also hear that we're going to go through another downturn. It's what happens in Oklahoma. So I think that the legislature needs to use this opportunity to address this issue so that we're not dealing with this in subsequent years. We cannot continue to build and dismantle, build and dismantle. What we need and what our kids need is stable, quality education.
How have you let the teachers know about these cuts that are coming in the future?
Well, I can't answer that. You mean this year?
This right now.
Right now, this is the only cuts to the teaching staff that we see.
But how did you inform them? Was there an email that went out, or did you have the principals have staff meetings?
Yeah, the principals got these staffing allocations prior to this announcement coming out.
Will this affect teachers on continuing contracts?
We don't think so. We think, great question, we think this is going to be just non-continuing teachers or teachers that are retired or leaving the district. So we hope to acquire all 208 positions through attrition or non-continuing contracts. I prefer through attrition.
What
But it
about
is
recruiting?
possible that some teachers on continuing
It is,
contracts.
it is possible, yes.
What about, how's this gonna affect for future recruiting when you try to sell this to, a year or two down the line when you say, hey, look, you can make us great, but they're kind of your job by 4 years, you didn't even make the cut.
Yeah. Well, I think that we've been, the question, if you couldn't hear in the back, was how does this affect future recruiting? This is a cyclical issue, so we've been dealing with this all along. And we just had a job fair, and we had one of our highest number of turnouts of candidates at our job fair, and this was only just 2 weeks ago. On the flip side, this is not just an Oklahoma City issue, this is a state issue. And we've got to address teacher pay, and we've got to address this budget issue.
As far as class sizes go, how large are we talking?
Well, again, it varies. It depends on the grade level. It depends on the course content. So a math class is going to be different than a physical education class or a music class, a band class. But basically, when you're talking about classroom settings and you're talking about the secondary, our goal is to keep our class sizes under 30 students per classroom. And then at the middle school, right around 27 or 28 per classroom, and at the elementary level, 24 or 25 students per classroom.
What's
Do
the
you see
state
any-
mandate?
I don't know those numbers. We can get that to you, though. In fact, I think, Mark, we have a list that we can get to them, yeah.
Do you see any certain sections of the city being hit harder with this?
Pardon?
Do you see any certain sections of the city being hit harder, like south side versus maybe the east side? Is this just gonna be basically,
No, I don't. Again, it was done in a way that we hope that is fair and equitable across the district, and the guiding factor is those class sizes.
Rob, how will course offerings be affected, if at all? When you're talking about what teachers you need to...
Tim, it just all depends on what the kids have requested, how many requests are in for a particular section, and then if we could run that section. So in better times, maybe there's a class, I'll pick on an advanced placement physics class that we would run if we had 16 or 17 requests. We may not be able to do that now.
How will these cuts affect what you've been able to accomplish in terms of academic improvement and gains you've made?
Well, there's no question it's going to have an impact. You know, first of all, we know that increasing class size isn't good for kids, but we also know that when we're faced with this budget shortfall, that we were going to have to do something about the class sizes. Secondly, it puts all the supports that we've been putting into place in the last year and a half into some level of jeopardy. It's critical that we're able to streamline the support that we provide to our teachers so that we're meeting the needs of our students. And I'm not just talking about students across the board, layers of programs or curriculum. I'm talking about being able to individualize and personalize the learning and meeting the needs of individual students. It's going to be difficult to do that. But as we move forward, we're going to continue to address the budget shortfall and do so in a way that we protect the kids at all costs.
Currently, how many teachers are there on staff?
We have approximately 2,700 teachers.
do you see this affecting extracurricular activities in the future?
Pardon?
Do you see this affecting extracurricular activities in the future?
Everything's on the table. And not prepared to answer those questions yet, but the potential is there that it could impact every facet of the organization, including extracurricular activities.
So all options are being considered.
Absolutely.
The governor just signed Senate Bill 1572 for $51 million to the State Department of Education. Will that have any bearing on these 208 positions, or is this already set in stone?
No, I don't think so. And I don't know what that allocation will be, the 51 million that the governor just signed.
We can spread it across 540 school districts, and, you know, it begins to minimize the impact of it. So we haven't seen what the actual allocation will be for the school district yet.
Can you say that for the record?
Yeah, so I appreciate the governor and the legislative leadership tapping the rainy day fund, because every little bit helps. But that 51 million, as it gets spread across the entire school district, will not have that great of an impact in Oklahoma City, and still cannot, at this time, address these reductions. Now, one of the things that I do want to emphasize, and I guess there's a little bit of an eternal optimist in me, and one of the reasons why we have waited to this point to release this first budget adjustment, and the reason that we're going to continue to wait as long as we can is to make sure that we have as clear a budget picture as we possibly can. One of the things I don't want to do is reduce positions, then get good news and restore them. Now, I'm not against restoring those positions, but this is impacting people's lives and their livelihoods. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to be sending out messages and upsetting those families and then coming back and making those adjustments. Although that would be a happy thing, we want to avoid that. We are working in a way that we are strategically addressing this budget shortfall so that we are protecting the classroom as much as we possibly can, and we're also making sure that we're doing everything we can to protect our employees.
When will staff members know when their position has been eliminated?
I think that that's going to begin that process now. Once these allocations in the building and those are then drive that master schedule, and then the building principals will know how that's going to impact their individual schools.
So starting this week, they can
Starting,
start?
yeah.
Will they work through the end of the year? Will they leave
Oh, yeah.
immediately?
Yeah, great question. These reductions are for next year. So we are going to continue to run our current school year on all of the allocations and the budget that we established back on July 1. And I want to note it, Tim, that with the reductions that we've made through the two revenue shortfalls, that's totaled about $6 million this year, and that's all come out of our rainy day fund, so that we've protected everything that we've budgeted this year.
Can you
Rob, give me an idea of the teacher that's going to be notified, whose position is going to be eliminated. Are they, and I know you mentioned this earlier, I didn't quite wrap my mind around it. First-year teachers, non-continuing contracts.
Right.
Give me an example of who these people are typically.
Well, the way we see this at this point is that of the 208 positions that are affected, it is my hope that all 208 will be through natural attrition, whether it be retirement or people leaving the teaching profession or people relocating for whatever reason. That's a normal part of our human resource function. Any positions left after that would be first addressed through non-continuing contracts. So that is our earliest experience, or our youngest experienced professionals. And then the third piece of that might be by certification or area affected. And I cannot speak to that specifically. I don't have that information, and that would be by building.
Any idea how many non-continuing contracts you have working in the district presently?
What was that? 1,100.
Can you talk a little bit more about how large class sizes affect learning and teaching, so the students and the teachers in the classroom?
Well, there's different research that talks to class size, and it's not very conclusive at the secondary level, and they basically say that at the elementary level, the desired class size would be 17 students per classroom, and that's obviously not achievable in this current climate before we started cutting budgets. But the bottom line is that you've got, education is a human resource investment business. In other words, we're providing our services by people serving people. And anytime you increase the number of students in a classroom, it's going to increase that workload of that teacher, and it's going to make it difficult for the teacher to get to each student and address them as individuals. The higher the number of students in a class, the more difficult it is for the student or the teacher to meet their individual needs.
Time for just 2 more questions.
These reductions are based on next year's budget. So can you talk about what estimates you're getting from the state that have have led to this discussion? I mean, what numbers have the state given you to say you can expect this, and where does it come from and when? Does that make sense?
Well, I'm going to ask Scott to help me out with that. I should have had that, Ben, and because that's been driving this whole conversation. But basically, we've had to cut approximately $10 million from the state allocation. We've had E-rate dollars, which, if you want, do you want to explain that to folks, and then I'll repeat it.
Right. We've had lapsed appropriations, or lapsed purchase orders, that we've been able to return those funds to the fund balance and be able to use that to cover some of our operating expenses for the current year. And those don't exist any further. We've exhausted that. Done everything we can as far as just exploring POs that we could lapse that are no longer going to be used by the district, and use that to fund operating expenses.
What about E-rate dollars?
That is E-rate.
Okay.
That's the lapse.
And how much is that?
Purchase orders. For
About-
this year, about $8 million.
Yeah, and then we've already spent down $6 million in our fund balance, and that gets us to about $25 million, and the other $5 million is from,
Well, just the 2 years combined as far as what's happening in 2016, what's happening, and what we're projecting will happen in 2017.
So if your budget allocation is the exact same next year as it is this year, these cuts are still necessary?
yeah.
One more question. guys.
22 million is a lot left to still have to cut. We're seeing you're cutting 200 positions, and that's only 8. How hard is it going to be to get to the rest of that 22 million?
Extremely difficult.
Is it something that's doable?
We have no choice. But one of the things that I will say is that if it reaches a point where we can no longer offer the quality program that our kids deserve, then I think that the option might be to run our school system to a point where we can no longer, we're going to have to shorten the calendar if that becomes our last option. And I say that because, you know, what's the lesser of two evils? Do you run a full calendar school year with stripped down programs, or do you run a shortened calendar with rich quality programs that our students deserve? I think that's the next conversation that we're going to have here in Oklahoma City and throughout the state.
When you say shortened calendar, are you talking about reducing the number of days per week or going back to a traditional calendar? School year calendar?
Tim, we're not that far into the conversation. I don't believe that a 4-day calendar, a 4-day school week is good for kids, nor do I believe in shortening the calendar school year. But if it were up to me, I would rather end the school year early than to go to a 4-day week. And I say that because, and again, it's a catch-22. How do you want to divvy it up? But a lot of our kids, 90% of our students here in Oklahoma City, are living in poverty. And for a lot of them, this is where they get their meals. And when we don't have school, not only are they not learning, but they're not eating. And so that becomes part of the challenge moving forward is where does this money come from? And how do we address these issues?
Okay, that was a follow. So let me, real quick, I know you said everything's on the table, you're gonna have to make some other cuts. At what point do you consider cutting administrative positions? I know you've added quite a few.
We're going to be cutting them. We're going to be cutting administrative positions. Everything's on the table, and those decisions, whether it be central office or building level administration, those decisions are going to be announced in the near future.
Does that include arts and sports?
Pardon?
The arts programs and sports?
I'm going to do everything I can to protect arts programs and sports.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.